that the background is dry, the water is dry, let's start working on the boat. So I resketched just the sailboat, just so you can see the process without all that background that can get you a little confused. So I'm just gonna do it in a clean way, just the boat. The best approach is kind of like when I paint lamps, when I paint walls, any architectural pieces, my approach is actually wet on dry, and a lot of it is done with dry brushing because we need texture. And I found this technique to work best like on any pieces like that. It just makes it look more natural, more organic, instead of like trying to put it all together wet on wet, because that smoothness doesn't necessarily work on architectural pieces. So that's the thing. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, the best approach is actually to do this pretty quickly, paint it very fast, the boat, do it wet on dry for the most part, except for these parts. We're going to actually do that wet on wet first and then wet on dry. But let's start with the bottom part. So I have my round 8 golden wand brush. I'm actually gonna find one that have a finer point here. It is important to have a fine point on your brush because you'll be using that fine point. So if you ever get it brushed, like new brush, basically any new brush, take the cover off. But before you begin painting or doing anything, make sure you get rid of this gum arabic. All right, now I have a best point ever, right? Because it's super fine. So I'm going to slightly dip my brush in water, and I'm going to create my own shade of black. So I'm gonna grab a little bit of indigo here, some of this Van Dyke brown, maybe some red already. There it is. So there's my blend. I don't know if I have enough color, so I'm just gonna add a little more. I do need quite a bit of it. Here you go. All right, so this is my shade of black. So it's just a combination of different colors. And I want to have actually enough water too, because I need to create a fine, or not fine, but like consistent stroke here. So I just go like this. There's a lot of dry brushing involved. If you want this to be more bluish, then you add more blue to it. If you want this to be more reddish, you add more red. But shape it from each side here. The bottom here is reddish. So something like this. I'm just dry brushing through here. Doesn't have to be perfect. The more actually you do like leave these areas of from dry brushing, the more natural it looks, the more organic it looks. So I just grabbed a little more paint. I'm gonna leave some of these spots the way they are. But here I do want this nicer line overall. So something like this. And now quickly before it's dry, I am going to grab this more like a milk-like ratio, and this is my Pearl Red and Quint Red. And right here, this is the part of the boat that's reddish. So a quick stroke to connect those parts of the boat. And that's pretty much it, but there's a little bit more of this kind of reddish tone here. So I'm gonna use this paint right there. I'm gonna clean the brush, clean it. And what we could do right away when we start painting that is grab more of that red and go on the bottom, because we are going to create these reflections on the water. And then we can grab our black again for these reflections. Maybe I went too far, but for the reflections, I'm gonna wanna have some of that shade of black right underneath as well. Now to have it, I don't actually want to do too dry brushing when I do these lines. So I will need to have way more paint on my brush, or more paint and water in general. So a little more of that Van Dyke brown, some red. There you go. So that's the boat, this part of the boat. So this is not done yet. Now I want to work with the grays, which would be like a yellow, blue, and red. I want to create a quick shade of gray. I have a class about this if you're not familiar with creating your own shade of gray. And it's just like with the tip of my brush, I want to show some of these parts of the boat. Now, because we already have background, it's going to be much easier to do a lot of it, because it's just the background shaped parts of the boat already. So some parts here, some lines, not too much, because we actually need to go towards these parts here, but I want to add a little more to it. Now, to paint these parts, so I am going to wet it first. Doesn't have to be wetted perfectly. So wet it. Because they are white, it's just that they're reflecting colors from the sea. There you go. And now I'm gonna grab this gray, but the main color is blue. So it's like a blue gray. And I'm just going to add it mostly toward the darkest areas that I see. Whoops, I went way too far. So I'm just gonna have to reshape the fabric here. Okay. So I had to reshape the whole thing basically because I went too far, and I still went too far. All right, that'll be fine now. And then this part is a little darker right here. So like a thicker paint along that line there. And then let's grab a little bit of some brown with it. Everything is painted quickly. And then I'm going to clean the brush, and I'm going to do the same thing with this part right here. I'm going to try my best not to go over the lines, because if you do, then the paint goes there too. Wet it first. And then the same colors. Although that feels even more like a yellowish tone. So I added more yellow with my red and blue. Again, I am going to attach the link or add the link in the post for those of you that are not familiar with creating your own shade of gray. Anything that's unclear, let me know, because the chances are I already have a class about it. This is heavier ratio on the tip of my brush of just the indigo and some Van Dyke brown. And now I can go back here, but I also have to do the man sitting there. And then we'll come back for other parts. Now for the guy, let's grab the yellow, blue, gray, but mostly red, right? So it's a gray, but it's mostly red. And I'm just zooming in so you can see the person there sitting. Now it's just like spots. You're just finding spots. Nothing has to be perfect. It's just like a little shape of a person. You're just creating like a shape. He does have a sweatshirt, so I need to grab cream top. So that was like a water to milk like ratio, and now I'm grabbing this Van Dyke brown and indigo, and I'm just gonna add it toward the darkest areas. I have a little too much water here, and I tried to remove it, but just adding these colors already, even though it's spreading, it's already giving me like a shape of a person there. So whatever is the darkest, actually looks like two people, which is fine too. I'm actually gonna extend this part for the motor, and then since I have some paint, I'll use this up here. Once things dry, then you can add smaller accents. So I have this indigo and Van Dyke brown, so I'm just adding it like this, like towards some of the areas. So I'm gonna zoom out. So there is really not much to it, right? When we paint the boat, everything is kind of dry brushing, and it's done pretty quickly, and that's the idea. So if you've taken like the architectural classes with me, where I was painting a doorknob, I was painting a padlock, like rusted padlock, I was painting some other windows, I was painting a wall with a window, a wall with a door. There's a lot of these kind of pieces, and it all kind of falls into the same category of painting these architectural pieces, doing the wet on dry and dry brushing. So very, very different compared to how I paint animals. Very, very different. So I'm just adding a little more of that yellow gray, and I'm gonna leave it the way it is. I'm gonna take a photo of it so you can see it, so you can study it. But it's the most important is to really go fast, because you don't need to go you don't need to create any details here. This is something that needs to be done fairly quickly. So I'm going to now move on to our main painting here. So we're going to paint this sailboat here. So this is done for now. When I see that the highlight has some color in it, and in this case it's like a blue violet, so follow blue with some quint red, that's when I know, okay, this is going to have that undertone layer. And so when you look at the highlight, this part is kind of really like white almost, and then you have the blue.